The heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis cut through the black Pacific waters at 22 knots, her bow slicing phosphorescent waves under a moonless sky. July 30, 1945. Captain Charles McVay stood on the bridge, scanning the horizon through salt-stained binoculars. The Indianapolis had just completed the most secret mission of World War II, delivering critical components for the atomic bomb to Tinian Island. Now she sailed alone toward Leyte Gulf, unescorted through submarine-infested waters. Seaman First Class Edgar Harrell crouched in the forward gun tub, manning a 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun. The Indianapolis carried a crew of 1,196 men, and Harrell had served aboard her for 18 months. He knew every rivet, every compartment, every face in the crew mess. The ship had survived kamikaze attacks at Okinawa, taken a bomb through her fantail, and limped back to Mare Island Navy Yard for repairs. Now she was heading home again, her mission complete. "Keep your eyes peeled," Gunner's mate Peterson whispered to his crew. "These waters are crawling with Japanese submarines. I-class boats been hunting our supply lines for months." The Indianapolis had no sonar contact with enemy vessels. Her outdated SG radar swept the empty Pacific, detecting nothing but waves and darkness. Captain McVay had requested a destroyer escort, but Task Force 95 Command denied his request. Intelligence reports indicated no Japanese submarine activity in their assigned route. The Indianapolis would make the run to Leyte Gulf alone, just as hundreds of other Navy vessels had done throughout the Pacific campaign. Below decks, Marine Private Giles McCoy lay in his hammock, writing a letter to his girlfriend in Missouri. The 1st Marine Division veteran had fought at Peleliu and Okinawa, survived cave-to-cave fighting against fanatical Japanese defenders. This cruise aboard the Indianapolis felt like a vacation compared to storming Pacific beaches under enemy fire. McCoy folded his letter and tucked it into his footlocker, next to photographs of home and a Japanese flag he'd taken at Peleliu. At 2,300 hours, most of the Indianapolis crew had turned in for the night. The heavy cruiser maintained her course at 22 knots, her 4 Parsons steam turbines generating 107,000 shaft horsepower. Her 8-inch guns remained trained fore and aft, their barrels silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The Indianapolis displaced 9,950 tons fully loaded, measuring 610 feet from bow to stern. She was one of 7 Portland-class heavy cruisers in the Pacific Fleet, built for surface combat against enemy warships. Lieutenant Commander K.C. Moore stood watch in the Combat Information Center, monitoring radio frequencies and radar contacts. The Indianapolis had been sailing under radio silence since departing Tinian Island, maintaining complete communications blackout to avoid Japanese detection. Moore checked his chronometer. 2,315 hours. In 8 hours, they would reach the relative safety of Leyte Gulf and rejoin Task Force 95's destroyer screen. 6 miles away, Lieutenant Commander Makitsura Hashimoto peered through the periscope of the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-58. The Type B cruiser submarine had been stalking American shipping lanes for 3 weeks, hunting targets of opportunity. Hashimoto commanded a crew of 94 men aboard the 356-foot submarine, armed with 6 bow torpedo tubes and a deck gun. The I-58 had sunk 2 American vessels during her current patrol, claiming 4,200 tons of enemy shipping. Through his periscope, Hashimoto spotted the unmistakable silhouette of an American heavy cruiser steaming at high speed. The target appeared to be a Portland-class or Indianapolis-class vessel, displacing nearly 10,000 tons. Hashimoto's hands trembled with excitement. This was the largest target his submarine had encountered during the entire war. "Battle stations," Hashimoto whispered to his executive officer. "Load all torpedo tubes with Type 95 torpedoes. Set depth at 10 feet, speed 48 knots. The I-58's crew loaded 6 Type 95 torpedoes into their forward tubes. Each torpedo carried a 891-pound warhead, capable of punching through the heaviest armor plating. The Type 95 was oxygen-fueled, leaving no wake trail as it raced toward its target at nearly 50 knots. Hashimoto calculated the Indianapolis course and speed, plotting an intercept course that would bring his torpedoes into perfect firing position. On the bridge of the Indianapolis, Captain McVay reviewed his navigation charts with officer of the deck Lieutenant John Orr. Their course would take them through the Petty Triangle, a relatively safe shipping lane used by dozens of Navy vessels every month. McVay had commanded the Indianapolis for 18 months, taking her through some of the heaviest fighting in the Pacific theater. The ship had bombarded Japanese positions at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, weathered kamikaze attacks and enemy shore batteries. "Sir, should we commence zigzag pattern?" Lieutenant Orr asked, checking his watch. Standard operating procedure called for ships to zigzag when crossing potentially dangerous waters, making it harder for enemy submarines to calculate firing solutions. Captain McVay studied the calm seas and clear visibility. Negative. Maintain present course and speed. Intelligence reports no enemy submarine activity in this area. At 2,330 hours, Lieutenant Commander Hashimoto had maneuvered the I-58 into perfect firing position. The American heavy cruiser steamed directly toward his submarine, presenting a perfect broadside target. Hashimoto could see the ship's superstructure through his periscope, her gun turrets and radar masts clearly visible against the starlit sky. "Fire 1, Hashimoto commanded. "Fire 2. Fire 3-inch. 3 Type 95 torpedoes erupted from the I-58's bow tubes, their oxygen-fueled engines accelerating them to 48 knots. The torpedoes ran straight and true, racing through the Black Pacific toward the USS Indianapolis at a depth of 10 feet. Hashimoto kept his eye pressed to the periscope, watching the torpedo wake streak toward their target. Aboard the Indianapolis, Seaman Edgar Harrell was rotating his 40mm gun mount when he spotted something moving through the water off the starboard bow. 3 parallel wakes, perfectly straight, racing toward the ship at incredible speed. Harrell's blood turned to ice. "Torpedoes off the starboard bow." Harrell screamed into his sound-powered telephone. "Torpedoes in the water." The first Type 95 torpedo struck the Indianapolis forward of the bridge, detonating against her starboard side with tremendous force. The 891-pound warhead blew a massive hole in the ship's hull, buckling steel plates and fracturing her keel. The second torpedo struck amidships, demolishing the forward engine room and killing dozens of sailors instantly. The third torpedo missed, racing past the Indianapolis stern and detonating harmlessly in deep water. The explosions lifted the Indianapolis nearly out of the water, her 9,950-ton hull flexing like a broken spine. The forward magazines detonated in a chain reaction, sending a pillar of flame 500 feet into the night sky. The blast wave shattered every piece of glass aboard the ship, throwing sailors across compartments like rag dolls. Marine Private McCoy was blown from his hammock by the first explosion, landing hard against a bulkhead as seawater poured through the ruptured hull. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging the ship into absolute darkness. McCoy could hear men screaming, the grinding of twisted metal, the roar of rushing water flooding the forward compartments. "Abandon ship." Captain McVay's voice echoed through the ship's public address system. "All hands abandon ship." The Indianapolis listed heavily to starboard, her bow already underwater. Sailors poured topside, many wearing only underwear or dungarees. The ship's life rafts had been destroyed by the explosions, leaving only a few cork life preservers and wooden debris. Most of the crew would have to jump into the Pacific wearing only their life jackets. Seaman Harrell made his way to the starboard side, where hundreds of sailors were already abandoning ship. The Indianapolis was sinking fast, her forward magazines still exploding in brilliant orange flashes. Harrell could see men jumping from the fantail, their tiny figures disappearing into the black water 60 feet below. "She's going down by the bow," Chief Petty Officer Harrison yelled over the chaos. "Get off the ship now or she'll take you with her." The USS Indianapolis had served with distinction throughout the Pacific War, participating in major amphibious assaults at Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and Saipan. Her 8-inch guns had provided naval gunfire support for Marine landing forces, hammering Japanese fortifications with high-explosive shells. The ship had weathered kamikaze attacks that killed dozens of her crew, survived bomb damage that required months of repairs at Mare Island Navy Yard. Now she was dying in 12 minutes. Private McCoy reached the main deck and looked down at the oil-slicked water surrounding the ship. Hundreds of sailors were already in the Pacific, their heads bobbing like cork floats in the swells. The Indianapolis continued settling by the bow, her massive propellers rising out of the water as she assumed a nearly vertical position. McCoy took a deep breath and jumped. The Pacific water was warm, probably 80 degrees, but the shock of immersion knocked the wind from McCoy's lungs. He surfaced gasping, treading water as the Indianapolis towered above him like a sinking skyscraper. Her stern rose higher and higher, exposing her bronze propellers and rudder assembly. Men continued jumping from the fantail, some striking the ship's hull on the way down. At 0012 hours on July 30, 1945, the USS Indianapolis disappeared beneath the Pacific waves. Her bow struck the ocean floor 12,000 feet below while her stern was still visible above water. The suction created by her sinking pulled dozens of swimmers down into the depths, their life jackets insufficient to overcome the tremendous downward current. 900 men found themselves floating in the Pacific, scattered across several miles of open ocean. Most wore standard Navy life jackets, simple cork-filled vests that kept their heads above water. A few lucky survivors clung to floating debris, wooden crates, life rafts, sections of deck planking. But the vast majority treaded water in their life jackets, waiting for rescue ships that had no idea the Indianapolis was missing. The heavy cruiser had been sailing under radio silence, maintaining complete communications blackout throughout her voyage from Tinian Island. No distress signal had been transmitted before the ship sank. Task Force 95 Command would not expect the Indianapolis to arrive at Leyte Gulf for another 36 hours. The survivors faced at least 2 days in the Pacific before anyone realized they were missing. Chief Petty Officer Harrison organized the survivors into groups, ordering men to link arms and stay together. The Pacific swells were running 4 to 6 feet, making it difficult for swimmers to spot each other in the darkness. Harrison estimated that 800 to 900 men had survived the sinking, though many were injured by the explosions or the ship's debris. "Stay calm and stay together," Harrison shouted over the wind and waves. "The Navy knows our route. Rescue ships will find us within 24 hours. But Harrison was wrong about the timing. The Indianapolis had been crossing a vast empty section of the Pacific, hundreds of miles from the nearest Allied base. No scheduled air patrols covered their position. No surface vessels operated in their vicinity. The survivors were completely alone in 50,000 square miles of open ocean. As dawn broke on July 31st, the survivors got their first clear look at their situation. Hundreds of sailors floated in scattered groups across miles of Pacific swells. Many were badly burned from the explosions, their skin blackened and blistered. Others had been cut by flying debris or broken bones jumping from the ship. Several men had already died during the night, their bodies floating face down among the living. Marine Private McCoy floated in a group of 30 Marines and sailors, all clinging to a section of wooden decking that had broken free from the Indianapolis. The Marines had survived amphibious assaults at Peleliu and Okinawa, fought in caves against fanatical Japanese defenders. But those battles had lasted days or weeks. This ordeal in the Pacific might last much longer. "Where are the rescue planes?" Seaman Rodriguez asked, scanning the empty sky. "They should have spotted us by now." Chief Harrison checked his waterproof watch. 1,400 hours. The survivors had been in the water for 14 hours. Standard search and rescue procedures called for immediate air searches when vessels failed to report their positions. But the Indianapolis had been maintaining radio silence, operating under secret orders that prohibited normal reporting procedures. The Pacific sun blazed down on the survivors with merciless intensity. Men without hats suffered severe sunburn within hours, their faces and necks blistering in the tropical heat. Those who drank seawater became violently ill, vomiting salt water until they were too weak to stay afloat. Several sailors had already drowned, overcome by dehydration and exhaustion. That afternoon, the sharks arrived. tiger sharks and blue sharks, drawn by the scent of blood and the vibrations of hundreds of men thrashing in the water. The predators circled the survivor groups, their dorsal fins cutting through the swells like gray knives. Most of the sharks measured 8 to 12 feet in length, apex predators that had never encountered such a concentration of helpless prey. The first attack came at 1,630 hours. A 12-foot tiger shark struck Seaman Phillips from below, dragging him underwater in an explosion of blood and foam. Phillips' screams echoed across the water before cutting off abruptly. His body surfaced moments later, horribly mutilated, then disappeared as other sharks moved in to feed. "Stay together," Chief Harrison yelled. "Make noise. Splash the water." Sharks don't like aggressive prey. But the sharks were beyond deterrence. They had found a feeding ground unlike anything in their evolutionary experience. Hundreds of wounded, exhausted humans floating helplessly in open water. The attacks came in waves, sharks striking from below and dragging victims into the depths. The survivors could only watch in horror as their shipmates disappeared one by one. Private McCoy clung to his piece of deck planking and tried not to think about what was happening beneath the surface. The water around his group had turned red with blood. Bodies floated everywhere, some missing limbs, others torn completely in half. The living crowded together on debris, trying to get as much of their bodies out of the water as possible. By the second night, July 31st to August 1st, the survivor count had dropped from 900 to approximately 600 men. Shark attacks had claimed dozens of lives, while dehydration and exposure killed many more. Some men had suffered complete psychological breaks, swimming away from the groups to certain death. Others had drunk so much seawater that they died of salt poisoning, their kidneys shutting down completely. The survivors who remained grew increasingly desperate. Several men had hallucinations of rescue ships on the horizon, swimming toward imaginary vessels until they drowned from exhaustion. Others claimed to see the Indianapolis still afloat, diving underwater to return to their sunken ship. The combination of dehydration, exposure, and psychological trauma was breaking down the survivors' mental defenses. Seaman Harrell floated in a group of 50 men, many of them delirious from thirst and exposure. He had removed his shoes to use as water containers, catching occasional raindrops during brief tropical showers. But the rain never lasted long enough to provide meaningful relief. Harrell's lips were cracked and bleeding, his tongue swollen to twice its normal size. "I can see the Indianapolis," Machinist's mate Cooper mumbled, pointing at empty water. "She's right there, about 100 yards away. We should swim back to the ship." Cooper slipped away from the group and began swimming toward his hallucination. Harrell and several other sailors tried to follow him, but Cooper was already too far away. They watched helplessly as sharks circled the lone swimmer. Cooper disappeared beneath the surface without making a sound. On the morning of August 2nd, Lieutenant J.G. Wilbur Gwynn was piloting a PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber on a routine anti-submarine mission over the Philippine Sea. The twin-engine aircraft was equipped with magnetic anomaly detection gear, designed to locate submerged submarines by detecting disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field. Gwynn was flying at 3,000 feet when he spotted something unusual in the water below. "What the hell is that?" Gwynn muttered, banking his aircraft for a closer look. Through his binoculars, he could see what appeared to be an oil slick stretching for miles across the Pacific. As the Ventura descended to 1,000 feet, Gwynn realized he was looking at hundreds of men floating in the water. Gwynn immediately radioed his base at Peleliu. "Many men in water. Need emergency rescue immediately." The message electrified every rescue unit in the Pacific theater. Within hours, PBY Catalina flying boats were airborne from bases across the Philippines and Guam. The destroyer USS Cecil Doyle diverted from her patrol route, racing toward the survivor coordinates at flank speed. Additional destroyers and destroyer escorts joined the rescue operation as word spread through the Pacific Fleet. By the time the first rescue ships arrived, fewer than 317 men remained alive in the water. They had survived 96 hours of shark attacks, exposure, dehydration, and hallucinations. Many were barely conscious, their bodies ravaged by saltwater ulcers and severe sunburn. The rescuers pulled dozens of bodies from the water, men who had died just hours before help arrived. Chief Harrison was among the survivors hauled aboard the USS Cecil Doyle, his body so weakened that sailors had to carry him to the sick bay. He had watched nearly 900 men die over 4 days, including most of his closest friends aboard the Indianapolis. The heavy cruiser that had delivered the atomic bomb components to Tinian Island had become the worst naval disaster in United States history. Marine Private McCoy was rescued after floating for 4 days on his piece of wooden decking. He had survived 2 major Pacific campaigns and 96 hours in shark-infested waters, but the psychological trauma would haunt him for the rest of his life. McCoy would wake up screaming from nightmares about tiger sharks and burning shipmates, his mind replaying those terrible days in the Pacific. The court-martial of Captain Charles McVay became one of the most controversial legal proceedings in naval history. McVay was charged with failing to zigzag his ship and failing to abandon ship in a timely manner, making him the only U.S. Navy captain court-martialed for losing his ship to enemy action during World War II. Many of the Indianapolis survivors testified on McVay's behalf, arguing that the captain had acted properly under the circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Hashimoto, the Japanese submarine commander who sank the Indianapolis, testified at McVay's court-martial via deposition. Hashimoto stated that zigzagging would not have prevented the torpedo attack, and that McVay had handled the abandonment procedure correctly. Despite this testimony from the enemy commander, McVay was convicted and sentenced to lose seniority in rank. The Indianapolis sinking remained classified for decades after the war, hidden from public view as an embarrassment to Navy leadership. The families of the dead sailors received standard casualty notifications, but no details about how their sons and husbands had died. Only in the 1990s did the full story emerge, revealing the systematic failures that had left 900 men to die in the Pacific. The USS Indianapolis had completed one of the most important missions in naval history, delivering critical components for the atomic bomb that would end World War II. Her sacrifice at Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved millions of lives by preventing a costly invasion of Japan. But the cost of that mission was paid by 879 sailors and Marines who died in the shark-infested waters of the Pacific, victims of bureaucratic confusion and naval incompetence. Today, the Indianapolis rests on the Pacific floor 12,000 feet below the surface, her hull broken but her guns still trained toward the enemy. She was found by civilian researchers in 2017, her wreckage remarkably well preserved in the deep ocean. The discovery provided closure for the families of the dead, confirming that their loved ones had served aboard one of the most famous ships in naval history. The survivors of the Indianapolis sinking carried their trauma for the rest of their lives, but they also carried the pride of having served aboard the ship that delivered the weapon that ended World War II. They had witnessed one of the greatest naval disasters in American history, but they had also participated in the mission that saved countless lives by preventing a bloody invasion of Japan. Their sacrifice in the Pacific waters off the Philippines ensured that the atomic bomb reached its target on schedule, ending the war and bringing peace to the world. The 900 men who went into the water on July 30, 1945, had completed their duty even as they faced death in the shark-infested Pacific. Their story remains one of the most compelling and tragic chapters in the history of the United States Navy.